Welcome to Exit Algorithms, the podcast where we decode what it really takes to unlock growth, streamline operations, and prepare your business for a high value exit. I'm your host, Pete Vera, and today I'm joined by Brian Root, a former Amazon and Walmart Labs product executive who now runs two ventures simultaneously: Norris Advisory, where he helps SMB buyers navigate due diligence and acquisitions, and Rooted in Product, his fractional CPO practice. Brian also holds a US patent in e-commerce product classification and spent years at companies like Assurance IQ and Fundera, where he drove millions in revenue impact across fintech and insurtech. Brian, so excited to have you today. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this. For listeners that haven't heard of you before, do you mind sharing a bit about your background?
Yeah,
Start as early as you want, and yeah, what
sure.
brought you to your current endeavors?
Yeah, I'm guessing almost everybody will not have heard of me. I'm not famous by any stretch, but yeah, I mean, I think my my kind of through line for how did I get to where I am right now. I mean, I could draw it as far back really as kind of growing up. I was exposed to computers by my grandfather, who was actually involved with building one of the very earliest computers ever made, which I love to say because it's
Mm.
just such a mind blowing statement, at this
Yeah.
day and age. But that really just exposed me to technology at a very early age. I loved to play around with programming stupid games in Quick Basic, as a 10-year-old. And then I got very into game theory and really studying kind of strategies that relates to both simple games but also companies and businesses. And that really kind of transitioned from what I studied in school into what I started to do as a professional, right? So my early career was in a lot of supply chain logistics, contract negotiation, things of that flavor. I went to business school, dabbled in a little bit of everything because that's just what excited me, just kind of expanding my horizons, and then really got into the kind of the technology portion of my career. As you mentioned, I spent about 8 or 9 years combined at Amazon and Walmart Labs. Really, I think about it as understanding kind of what good looked like in terms
Mm.
of both building technology, but also building the structures, the cultures, the ways of working and approaching things like customer obsession that I think are largely transferable to many other companies of different levels of sophistication and size. And then had a series of great opportunities to apply those learnings at startups of everywhere from Series A to very large post-acquisition, not technically a startup, but that's still that flavor of company. And then the last step, I suppose, is like many people in today's environment, I ended up getting laid off, which was a very shocking and unexpected, event for me. I really felt like
Yeah.
technology was a career path that was very stable. I had, a steady upward trajectory for the majority of my career. And that really just kind of was a shock to the system of like, oh,
Wow.
this, what I thought was going to, be a good career path for me is now suddenly very, insecure feeling. I think I very intentionally, when that happened, said, all right, I need to start expanding my horizons of what is
Mm.
possible, what seems like, a viable path for me, and really, spent months, frankly, kind of stripping back, like, what do I actually want? What do I actually find rewarding? What am I comfortable with, uncomfortable with? And, I will say candidly, my initial reaction to uh, the two things that I am doing right now, right, which is running my own small businesses and being involved in the ETA space was like, absolutely not. That sounds scary. I don't want to do that. Like, because the level of, the lack of security, right, that it has
Mm.
compared to when you have a full-time job and I have stability and all those things that you perceive when you're working for a larger company. My initial reaction to that was just like, oh God, no, that sounds bad. But,
Yeah.
I kind of just dipped my toe in, started looking at buying companies, started, a website, frankly, was the origin of both companies that I have right now that cost $25 and, an hour. And the more that I just kind of continued to dip my toe in, the more I realized I really enjoy the level of accountability that comes with running a small business, the agency, right? The more work I put in, the more reward I get, right? subject to the whims of, my boss's boss or, the investor board or whatever, right? Like I can control my own fate within reason, at least. And at least for me personally, what I found is that really appeals to me. And I did not realize that it would appeal to me so much before, I kind of went down this path. But that's led me to where I am. Running both companies kind of simultaneously is a challenge, but it's one that I find a tremendous amount of reward in both. At the core of both is really just the same skill set that I've developed as a technology executive over those years, which is this technology adding more benefit to your company than it's adding complexity? And we can do that at a very broad, mature scale, through the lens of my CPO practice, or I can do that at a very small scale through the lens of how does this small business, potentially leverage the technology, or how could it leverage technology better, to
Sure.
yield a better multiple or a better result for the owner.
Yeah, awesome. Wow, yeah, I love your story. That had to have been a difficult difficult time, but it seems like it was
Yeah.
a blessing in disguise. You made the most of the opportunity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would not, pretend that it was all, sunshine and roses and I just, got laid off immediately. It was like, all right, I'll just start a small business and everything will be fine. It was probably 6 to 9 of the hardest months of my life, right? Before I started getting traction with, rooted in product first. But, I think that's part of the reward of it. Like I know that every dollar I make, to a large extent right now is a result of having persevered through that tough period. And if nothing else, I can take a lot of pride from that, as I think a lot of,
Yeah,
small business owners do.
definitely. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and your interest in technology from an early age, I like, it's no surprise that that's your area of expertise really now, right? And helping
Yeah.
businesses with that. What has been some of the big tech shifts that you've seen throughout your career?
I mean, I think it's hard to speak to anything being more impactful than AI coming out within the last couple of
Yeah.
years, right? I think I learned a lot earlier in my career, particularly at Amazon, in terms of the philosophy, if you will, of how to approach applying technology, right? A lot of the things that we started building at were often Excel prototypes or literally just Word documents that said, here's how we should do things once we get to the stage of, being fully automated. But it was kind of this philosophy of define first. If I can't give you a structure of exactly how I would walk through this procedure or process or the logic that I would feed to a machine in any capacity to achieve the right decision, then, we're not really automating something and we're not really creating something that's scalable. We're just, kind of creating something that has an inherent human dependency that we can't do anything about. And that was something we were always trying to eliminate in some capacity at Amazon. It was either reduce the cost basis by offshoring it, eliminate as much of the non-value added parts of the human process as possible, or automate it fully. Right? And I say that because I think that fully applies to today's world. Now that we have AI and I have a super smart magic machine on my desktop at all times that can theoretically do anything, right? I think the same process applies there, right? Because what I see, and this applies again to large companies, small businesses, pretty much across the board. There's a naive or a knee jerk response to say, I can feed it garbage. Basically, I can like misspell half my words, and I can be super unclear about my intent, and it's still going to interpret something, and it's still going to give me a nice answer that looks like it understood, and looks like it's value added. And so, in any given interaction, you can kind of get fooled by that a little bit and think, I don't really need to, to go through that process of articulating what what good looks like. I can just
Mm,
feed it a bunch of stuff, and it'll start making good decisions. And I see people again doing this at a small business level. I see very, very large companies, with sophisticated tech, organizations falling into the same trap. Uh, and that I think is one of the biggest shifts, right? That we have something that is enabling us to go through less of a rigorous process to get something that looks like a good output. And it can be really dangerous, right? A lot of the work I
mm,
do, again, kind of in both lenses is sure, we can slap AI on this, but let's evaluate whether we should, right? In terms of what is the impact we're actually getting from it? What is the cost that it is incurring versus the cost that it's actually saving? A lot of the time, what you find is it like The AI is kind of an irrelevant layer. What it depends on is how well have you articulated what we're trying to achieve and what good looks like, or the sequence of events and decisions that you need to make in order to get to good for that thing. And if you've done the
Yeah.
first part, you can give it to somebody else to do. You can offshore it. You can give it to AI. Like you have a plethora of options almost, right? In terms of how to execute on that thing. If you haven't done that work, who knows what you're getting out, right? Like it's very risky to hinge your business on that. And from a small business sales perspective, like if I'm looking at a company that says, we're AI enabled, and I dig under the hood and it's just like we just feed a bunch of prompts to ChatGPT and implement
Sure.
whatever comes out. I'm like, you don't have a technology layer. You have a black box, like I don't know machine, right? And that's frankly kind of worthless, right? Like I can't value
Mm.
something if I don't know what it's actually going to produce in the future.
Yeah. Oh, I love that perspective. Yeah. How do you go about determining if they're using technology in the right way, or if it is just like
Yeah.
you mentioned, kind of just they're slapping it on and trying to, square, you know, s- uh, square peg round hole, just
Yeah.
put it, put a plug and play.
Yeah. I mean, to some extent, it's going to be difficult from a buyer's perspective to truly get the information you need. So what I look for typically is signals. If you can show me documentation that says, again, this is the outcome that we're trying to achieve. This is the sequence of events that we go through. And there's any level of nuance or sophistication that shows that you've thought through some of the edge cases, then I'm probably going to have a decent, degree of confidence that uh, you've thought through what you need. You've probably done some due diligence as to, how to build that software relatively accurately. And like, even if it's not perfect today, and there's room for improvement, like at least you're probably building off a relatively solid base. If you don't have the documentation, at least can I get that from you verbally? Can you explain to me? A lot of people kind of think about this as systems thinking, right? Can you talk to me in a structured way about how you have thought about implementing this technology? If it's
Mm.
I'm going to be a little bit facetious, but if it's just like this guy contacted me on LinkedIn and said that you could implement AI for my business, and he came in and did it for $5,000, seems to be working, then I'm like, okay, I don't trust any of
Mm.
this, right? So I'm looking for those types of signals, and I think you can also kind of see it sometimes in the customer facing experience for some of these businesses. Again, a lot of the time, a company will slap on AI enabled, and you go to the website and it's just like, oh, you have a chatbot. Okay,
Yeah.
like great, that's probably not even being used very much, right? So, uh, what it's being used for, how it's being talked about, how it's been, any evidence you can provide about how it's been structured or prompted in the case of an AI potentially, that'll at least give you the clues, right? My experience is good thought process yields good software. Bad thought process very rarely is going to yield anything of any value, right? So, if we can dig into the thought process, that at least gives a fair amount of vindication.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And that sounds like that's probably part of your due diligence
Mhm.
process in the acquisition phase is yeah, how do you focus on, do you focus primarily on technology, or how does that impact your due diligence process?
Yeah, so I mean, I focus primarily on businesses that I would describe it as tech enabled, right?
Tech
And that would
enabled.
include, I think, both pure software plays, SaaS companies, for example, but also a wide range of companies, even that could live in the purely the physical space for the most part, right? Like you could have a plumbing company that has some sort of proprietary software that helps them, provide better customer service or better target their customers with more efficient marketing. Or there's any range of potential applications of where software can be used as a lever. So digging into how is it being used, was it being used for, how was it developed, right? What I can typically provide is, to some extent this depends on how open the owner is willing to be. But, best case scenario, I've been able to get under the hood. I can tell you with a fair degree of confidence, is this software that you can actually build upon, and is it software that's actually, providing any sort of differentiation for you in the market, or is it just,
Mm.
off the shelf, or, something that any of your competitors can replicate with very little effort. Or, if I'm not getting a ton of information, at least I can, with a relatively, high degree of confidence say, these are the signals that I'm getting. And like when I'm getting a signal of this nature, my experience, and this is, where the experience that I can bring to the table is hopefully valuable, right? Uh, you are probably or probably not going to get a piece of software that is actually valuable based on, the way that they're talking about it, the way that they appear to have implemented it, sometimes even like the route they've gone down, right? Again, there's going to be a big difference in my mind between hiring, their buddy who's a computer programmer versus hiring a legitimate known offshore development firm versus plugging in ChatGPT, right? You're going to get a
Yeah.
wildly different result probably from those three things, right? So again, as advisors, like we're hunting for clues, right? But I think the more you know what to look for and how to probe for it, the more valuable the clues are, hopefully.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate that level of detail. And, and you're advising people through the business buying process. Do you do kind of evaluation of businesses or make sure that the buyer's not overpaying, for example, or try to,
Yes.
yeah. So
Yeah.
what are maybe some levers that are, or big buckets that increase the value of the business? Obviously technology, but beyond just, that and EBITDA, of course. I'd
Right.
love to hear your
Yeah.
perspective on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a couple things I'd speak to there, and really, I realize I've kind of talked only to evaluation of existing software, in the conversation so far. There's a reciprocal side of that, which is also assessing the business for opportunities to bring in software, right?
Mm,
And so, what I'm looking for in that capacity is to some extent the same thing, right? Have you articulated a repeatable path, right? Like, are you doing the same process over and over again in a structured way? And maybe you haven't thought to, bring in software to automate or semi-automate any part of that process. But if there's something that's repeated and that is not 100% reliant on human judgment, we can probably automate some part of that, right? So, evaluating for opportunities to layer in software subsequently is something that would, if properly applied, make a buyer probably willing to pay a little bit more of a higher multiple for it. Because what that's saying is your business is currently valued on a non-automated basis, right? And we can at least build the business case to say some parts of this should be automatable. I can either, yield a cost savings or revenue growth from that. So, ultimately my valuation for that business should go up once I've actually layered in the software. So that's one thing. And I think these go hand in hand, but uh, definitely looking for a business where the owner has intentionally extracted themselves from the decision-making process as much as possible,
mm,
right?
yeah.
Which I think is common for non-tech businesses as well, but it really speaks to how much do you have a business that will endure beyond the individual's judgment who's sitting in that CEO chair
Mm,
versus something that requires their connections, their thought process. And if they've done as much as they can to, again, doesn't have to be automate, but at least structure the thinking. These are my clients. These are how I approach them. These are, the conversations that I've had. These are the things that you need to be aware of. The more information that they can provide is like context so that the buyer comes in and is hopefully able to take in all of that context and start to make equivalently good decisions. Like that's a good sign to me versus if it's
mm,
just, you know, I call up Bob every quarter and we renew the contract. Okay. Like we are probably in a bit of a danger zone there, right? Because I don't know how to replicate that relationship with Bob or what that conversation is or any of these things that are yielding, the renewal of that contract, right? So again, the intention almost to extract yourself from the decision making process is the signal that I'm looking for. How well you've done it, a lot of times is going to be variable, but like an owner that knows that they have to approach it as something that they can hand over rather than something that is just kind of continuously going to be dependent on them. I think almost always you're going to see a more valuable business, right? From the buyer perspective, at least.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, owner dependence, eliminating the key main risk. Yeah, and then I love that what you said too about focusing on the opportunity for implementing new technology, like where you could take the business going forward.
Yeah. And I think that's where bringing in outside expertise does add a lot of value, right? For as much as AI is really easily accessible. Like you can go to ChatGPT right now, type in whatever you want and get an answer, right? Uh, to actually figure out how to use it in a business context to add outsized value to your business, it takes a lot of work, right? Like I will give you an example. I spend, a considerable amount of my time building software for my own business using, cloud code, things like that, right?
Mhm.
Where I started with that was, like painful in retrospect, right? Like you can't just like jump in and automatically start building things that are actually impactful pieces of software, right? You have to learn how the system works, how to interact with it. You have to learn, frankly, still a decent amount about shipping software because like it does 90% of it for you, but the other 10% is like really in the weeds, like software development stuff that takes a
Yeah,
fair amount of time to learn, right? So to expect any small business owner to like have the spare time to do all of that themselves while running the business, like it's just probably not realistic, right? So it's not that like most people are missing these opportunities because they're just not thinking of them. It's probably because they just don't have the bandwidth to realistically, take advantage of them. So having that outside perspective to say, here's where you could do that, right? Given the right expertise, given the right time, whatever it may take. I think it can be a big unlock, right? Because it's bringing called a more sophisticated perspective, at least on that one lens of the business.
definitely. Yeah, wow. I'd like to dive in a little bit more on that piece, the growing and scaling. What are maybe some of the first things that you would look at?
In terms of how to scale a business using technology, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I would break it down like this, right? So there's kind of two areas you can categorically focus on implementing software in a business. One is levers for growth, right? So what I'm looking for there is something that if we do more of this, and often in the context of implementing this through AI, there's also a critical kind of subcomponent to that question of and it doesn't need to be of the utmost highest quality because you are going to get, things that kind of veer towards the average, right? When you're doing an AI based process, at least in today's world. So if we
Yeah.
if we do a lot more of this and it's okay quality is fine, then that will yield better results for the business, right? So things like mass outreach to customers, for example, right? Like I don't need to have a an absolutely perfect, tailored pitch when I'm trying to, identify the 100,000 local businesses and see if they need, janitorial services or whatever. I'm just making things up, right? Like I
Mhm.
just need to find people who are in market, right? So that's something I can do, in kind of a very automated, way, right? So that is an area where I would look for kind of a growth lever. How do we set up a machine, a process, to continuously do this and just kind of not necessarily set it and forget it because I think having a human in the loop is really critical to actually getting decently high quality output, or at least making sure that it's not going off the rails, for now at least. So,
Maybe 90% of the way. Yeah.
right. Yeah, right. Exactly. So that's kind of one category of where I would look at, can we implement some sort of automation software, something to dramatically expand, the reach of things that drive revenue, right?
Mm,
Doesn't have to be marketing. I think that's kind of the lens I'm discussing it right now, but like there's a lot of other opportunities for that as well, potentially. The other is, and this really relates more strongly to the type of business you're looking at, but repeated internal processes that can be automated or in some cases even eliminated with with better software, with more automated decision making, for example, right? And that's a more interesting bucket often because what you're looking for there is more cost savings, and I think it's really dependent on kind of the scale of the business that you're at and the cost of those repeated activities, right? There's a lot of things that AI can easily do, that people are tempted to just let them do, let let AI do, uh, because it seems cool, right? But then you dig under the hood and you're like, that process was costing you like a fraction of a penny to do manually, and you do it, a couple times a week or whatever. I'm just making things up, but uh, and so you're actually paying more for the AI to do it than you were to do it manually internally, right? Like those things are a
mm,
horrible fit for applying technology and software. What you're looking for is those things that cost, uh, in aggregate, right? You roll up cost of doing the individual action times, how many times you're doing it per week, per month, or whatever.
yeah.
And that is a substantial line item for you. Then you can say, all right, there has to be some solution where we can automate or semi-automate, the thought process, the logic, or whatever it is of, the thing that achieves that result. And, if we can apply technology, we can lower the cost basis of the business in a meaningful way. If it doesn't
Yeah.
fit one of those two bills, like I just, it's not really worth thinking about candidly, right? So, where technology fits into every business, where it should fit, where it might fit, I think is highly variable. But, if you kind of at least start with that very high level framework, that at least tells you where to look or where not to look, I think.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, tying it to a metric and focusing either, the first one seemed more top line focused, the second
Yep.
bottom line, improving efficiency
Yeah.
and reducing
Yep.
costs. Yeah. Wow. And have you seen technology help a business owner make their business less dependent on them? Reduce that owner dependence that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've seen some really good examples. I mean, one of the businesses that I, helped facilitate the purchase of, the founder had, I believe himself, if I remember correctly, programmed a suite of completely proprietary software, right? And a lot of it was not to the quality that you'd expect from, an off the shelf product. But what it did do really beautifully was kind of encapsulate his thought process, right? The entire thing was mapped out for his bespoke needs. Here's how I think
Mm,
through this process. Here's the data that I need to see. Here's how I make decisions. And so basically what he was left with was, here's a piece of software that replicates how I think, basically, right? And there was a lot of opportunity to take that and improve it and make it more usable for the subsequent owner and other people involved in the business. But it was just this wonderful artifact of, like, you've taken your brain as much as possible and dumped it into a computer, right? And it not only helped his business, as at the time that he was actively running it, but it helped the transition process in a big way as
mm.
well, right? And I don't expect everybody to be able to code their thought process into
Yeah.
software. Like, he was a bit of a unicorn, candidly. But again, you can certainly write it down. You can structure it in a spreadsheet. You can anything that isn't just like, I think through it in my head and I write on some scratch paper is going to yield some value if you can store it in a structured way. And I think one of the interesting avenues for founders that have time and interest is to start working with AI tools like Cloud Code and all the other comparable tools out there, because you can take that document, you can take whatever you have, in your Google Drive and say, here's how I think, like, help me structure this more, help me build software if you want to, right? I wouldn't
Yeah.
encourage you necessarily to put that software at the center of your business, because it's going to have flaws and bugs and probably is going to be a security risk in a big way, but you can at least use it for your personal purposes, right?
Yeah.
You can use it to hand off to the future buyer to say, like, yeah, I'm not saying use this, but, like, at least it structures reflects my structured thinking, right? I think there's accessible flavors of this for everybody. I think, depending on how sophisticated you are with technology or not.
Yeah, 100%. It sounds like the one client, very sophisticated, but
Yes.
for a layman, that maybe doesn't have a super, crazy coding software development background, it can make a custom chat GPT and just give it, tons of context of how you think and how you write and decisions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, right.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think the value is in being able to hand off something structured.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't have to be even right. Like, it just has to reflect, like, here's how I run my business, because the more that we can understand how you've made the decisions that you've made, the more we can properly evaluate as buyers, what can I do to improve this? I don't know how I can improve. You've made a series of random decisions over time, some of which have worked out, right? Like, I don't know how I can build on that. I do know how I can build on, you've made decisions based in a structured way. Some are right, some are wrong. I can at least start pick out the pattern of the ones that are wrong or bad or if suboptimal, and think of ways to improve that. Then I have a thesis, right? That's actionable.
Absolutely. Yeah. That would definitely increase the value of the business, the comfortability of the buyer. But if you do it before the sale, it could help your team too. Like have
100%.
a product they can run by and questions by and things like that.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that. Um, yeah, well, Brian, you have two ventures going on at the same time. I imagine it's very difficult to structure your time, like with all the busy stuff you have going on during the week.
Yeah.
I was curious, how do you go about making a week that is focused and you get the right things done?
Yeah. I mean, it's a realistic struggle, right? I mean, one of the things that kind of smacked me in the face pretty quickly when I started running these businesses is there's literally a never-ending list of things that I could get done on a daily basis. Like, I chuckle sometimes because I'll come down from my office and my wife will ask, "Are you done for the day?" And I'm like, "That's a meaningless question." Like, no, I'm not. but I've decided to stop. That's a little different. But the way that I approach it, at least for now, which I'm finding works, in terms of balance, is a couple things. One, I have to be ruthless about my prioritization. A
Mm,
lot of my preparation time for any given day or week is in thinking about it, again, to some extent leverage, right? If I put my time here, what's the outcome I'm going to get for it versus, the other tasks or activities that I could spend my time on. Naturally, anything that I'm doing for a client probably rises to the top, right? This is a service business. Both of them are services businesses that I'm running, right? So making sure that my clients are happy is paramount, right? But I also have to really balance things that help grow my businesses as well, right? Like exactly as I've been saying, I don't want to look at somebody's business that I'm evaluating and see, oh, you just lucked into a bunch of clients and, some of the decisions you made worked, some didn't. Like, I'm trying to take that approach with my businesses as well, not necessarily because I'm trying to sell them, but because that's fundamentally what I believe, yields the best result, right? So I also have to take a step back sometimes and think about how do I build, for example, marketing and, uh, you know, you know, aspects that scale without me, right? So, where I referenced earlier, I'm building a lot of software. A lot of that software is to help me, automatedly or semi-automatedly identify opportunities to pursue new clients, to engage with those clients, to have a lot of these conversations in a way that doesn't require me to sit there for an hour thinking about the right way to approach it, right? So I'm building the scaffolding for myself right now, which takes a lot of time, candidly, so that
yeah.
next year or whenever, uh, I can spend a lot less time on that, right? So to me, I've always approached again both of these businesses as I don't know the time span on them, but they are long term endeavors in my mind, right? It's something that I both want to build from a quality perspective, but also a revenue and a quantity perspective. But the way that I want to do that is by, if anything, decreasing the amount of time that I have to spend on both businesses over time by
Mm,
automating and by structuring my thinking and by creating processes that are highly repeatable. And I think it's worthwhile to me today in the short term to spend a lot of time in the efforts of building those platforms, call it,
yeah.
so that my life is easier in 5 or 10 years as I continue to run both businesses. Right, like the last thing I want is one or both businesses hockey sticks and everything's going fantastically, and the only way that I can support that is by working 20 hours a day. Like I left that world. I intentionally, I'm not in big tech, living that kind of lifestyle, right? Like, so I
Yeah.
want to build both businesses, but in a way that scales disproportionately to my effort, candidly.
Love that. Yeah, that's a great perspective. Building the scaffolding, as you said. Yeah, doing the hard work now, it's probably frustrating too to make
Yeah,
those systems, but it's going to pay dividends later on.
hopefully.
Uh, yeah, I mean, and as you build out your team, all those systems are going to be no, they'll have access to them too, right?
Yep, yep,
Yeah, I love that. And I know we touched on AI. I'd like to go in a little further
yeah,
on how are you using it today, or maybe some use cases that our listeners haven't necessarily thought about?
yeah. So I'll speak to this from a couple lenses. So there's, I'll be the first to admit, I suppose, I've tried AI for all of the bad uses as well as the good uses, right? Like, I have, you know, over the last couple of years, as ChatGPT came out, for example, tried to use it to write thought pieces and to write LinkedIn posts and to do outreach to potential customers and things of that nature. And my experience with that has been largely that it is woefully insufficient for almost all of that, right? All of the things that are like the easiest to do and the easiest to like think about applying AI to seem to, it's just, I think part of the problem is everybody's doing them. And so very quickly it just turned into like, oh, this is more AI slop. Like,
Mm,
I'm dismissing that, right? So to do it well is a significant challenge, right? To do it in a way that people don't realize that you are automating a significant amount of the process of it, I think is a huge challenge. But like when I say that, I'm like that to me rings as exactly the same as my experience at Amazon, right? Different context, but Amazon was insanely automated, right? Today, not so much, but at the time that I joined, very much known for quality of customer service, right? So like
Mm,
the face of it, when I'm buying from Amazon, the face of it was, everything is made super easy for me. If I have a problem with my order, they fix it. If I, need to return something, they make it easy, blah, blah, blah. Right. So the engagement with the company was very customer obsessed and in a lot of ways personal. The back end of it was like the most impersonal thing you could imagine, right? It was just you are, one of a billion customers, but we've built the systems to surface all the information and create the experience that makes it feel like it's very tailored to you, right? And I think you can take that thought process and apply it to AI as well, right? The more that you're just kind of using it to create generic messages, the less it's going to resonate. The more you use it under the hood in a way that's hidden, subtle, it helps to make me more informed and then create, human actions as a result of that. Full automation of just, I'm going to send you a chat GPT message, right? The more that resonates, I think, right?
mm.
So I think that's a huge area of opportunity for people in how they think about using AI in particular, right? Like a lot of it is just the easy answer is often not going to be the one that really works, right? And I would encourage people to go down that path of like, by all means, use it. Have that experience of it not working, right? Just don't stop there. Like I think the thing that differentiates kind of the people who are successful, people and companies, I should say, using AI versus not in today's world are the ones that are being very thoughtful about it and learning from the experience, not just like kind of glomming onto like, oh, this capability came out. I'm going to jam it into my business or I'm going to jam it into like how I create contact on LinkedIn or whatever, right? Go through the learning process. It's a tool, right? You have to treat it like a tool. You have to learn how to use a tool and you're probably going to be bad at it initially, right? But like embrace that, be okay with it, get the feedback, learn how to adjust, like really, you know, there's a very fundamental difference in approach, I think, in terms of what yields success versus what just seems easy to do in the moment.
Yeah. Wow, I love that psychology. That's really useful. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
And that's a very common mistake people are making as they dabble with AI, trying to how to do everything instead of viewing it like making it the full product. View it like it'll help you to research and produce a better product. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I would also really caution people against in some capacity is if you don't know what good looks like in a particular area, marketing, sales, whatever, like do not let your AI do it for you because it's just like you're not going to get a above average result, right? Unless you are giving it explicit instruction and guidance and context and feedback on what good looks like continuously, right? Average is just not going to cut it as a differentiator for almost any business in any capacity, right? So, I think that's where a lot of people go wrong as well. And that's been a lot of my personal journey and understanding of how to use AI in a way that actually it does add value to my business, right? Marketing, business dev, sales, things that I'm completely not experienced in, right? In my previous career. Um, so, I've used AI as a way to help myself better understand what good looks like. But that's been candidly a year and a half long journey, probably to get
Yeah.
from, first implementation of something which turned out to be crap, but like to get to the point where now I feel at least more confident saying I can differentiate value added activities from non value added activities, or I can differentiate what actually works, in some contexts from what clearly doesn't, right? And I'm sure there are people who have way more sophistication in all those areas who would look at what I'm doing right now and be like, you're getting so many things wrong. And I am. But like my point is it's a learning journey, right? I'm continuing to the systems that I'm building have feedback loops built into them
Yeah.
intentionally to say, this didn't work. Why? Learn from that. Like let's, continue
Mm,
to evolve as we use this technology, right? So my fundamental like advice for anybody who's thinking about using software, particularly AI based software, is like just don't plug and play and go away and do something else. Like it has to be an evolution of you learning how to use the tool and the tool learning from you what good looks like and continuing to calibrate towards what works for your business and your context.
that's great advice. Yeah. Wow. It takes some hard work and some trial and error to
Yeah.
get a really practical, useful tool.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
I love that. Well, I know we're coming up on time here, Brian, but I wanted to give you the floor if you want to plug your business and where can listeners find you easiest?
Yeah. So I mean, easiest place would be on LinkedIn. Just Brian Root, pretty straightforward. If you'd like to investigate either business more in depth, the relevant websites are rootedinproduct.com or Norris Advisory. That's NORIS advisory.com. Always happy to have a conversation with anybody who, certainly in this context is thinking about buying a small business. I think entrepreneurship through acquisition is a really fascinating space that, coming from tech, people have a lot of really valuable skills that they don't always necessarily see how they would translate to being a small business owner. But from my perspective and having gone through that journey myself, I think the things that you learn about how to build software often really, really strongly translate on how to build a business as well. So happy to have a conversation with anybody who's even pondering whether that transition might be right for them.
Great. Yeah. Awesome. I appreciate all the insights today, Brian. It was great having you on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Pleasure to be here.